In this tutorial, we're going to be looking at the best stretches for lower back pain. So I've broken it up into three. First of all, we're going to look at the stretches. Then what we're going to do is look at why they're better. And then finally, we're going to look at how to select them, because some may be better than others for certain people at certain times. If you like what you hear and see in this tutorial, please do stick a like and a comment in the comment section below. Click the subscribe button and the bell icon and you'll get notified when I release more of my tutorials. Also, if you think this is going to be helpful for your lower back pain, please do just click the link below and you'll go through to my lower back pain rehabilitation package, which includes pre-consultation questionnaires, the consultation itself, the advice and recommendations that we create in the consultation, and support to implement them after the consultation is complete. We've got 4 stretches. They're all centered around the hip, because if you watch my previous video, which is the reasons not to do knees to chest and the hamstring stretches, you'll understand that the hips is a much more effective place to start. So we're going to look at the adductor stretch, we're going to look at the psoas stretch, the glute stretch, and the rectus femoris stretch. So all those stretches, very simple. We're going to come, this is for the adductors, so this is stretch number 1, which is a nice wide stance here, and then just coming down onto all fours, stretching the inside of the leg. So that's stretch number 1. Stretch number 2 was psoas. So with psoas, what we do is we come into this half kneeling position, knee is below the hip, and then we lift this arm up to extend the thoracic spine to get full elongation through the psoas, from the insertion of the psoas all the way to the origin of the psoas in the thoracic spine. So we've got that whole length being worked through. So that is stretch number 2. Stretch number 3 was rectus femoris, where I'm just going to use this roller to aid me. Now you can use a step, a bench, a chair, but basically we come into this position. Again, we're half kneeling, but this time we've got the foot up. So now it's going through the rectus femoris, which joins the pelvis onto the knee. And then finally, we've got the glute stretch, which is, again, you can do this on a raised surface, but we come into this position, we go into this externally rotated position. So we're going to be stretching through the internal rotators of the hip, and you will get some of the external rotators as well in the glute medius, and then also the glute max as well. Why are these stretches better? So why is it better to stretch the hips than it is the lower back and the hamstrings? Well, as I mentioned in the previous tutorial about why not to do the hamstring and the chest stretch, or the knee to chest stretch, is the hips are a much better indicator, or hip internal and external rotation are much better indicators of back problems. So if we have tightness through the hip, it's a much better indicator of back pain than the hamstrings and the lower back are. So we can stretch out, obviously, the external rotation with the glutes. We've got the adductors. So what we're starting to do is loosen up this range of movement so it can move through that external and internal rotation. So it's going to be a much more effective way at releasing the pressure on the lower back, because as I've mentioned in many videos before, tight hips, sort of the pain gets expressed out of the lower back. So if we can loosen off the hips, it disperses the pressure around the hips so it doesn't then come through on the lower back. Reason number 2 is general range of movement is a better indicator. But again, as I've mentioned with everything, it's not always, it will depend on the individual. So it would be things like hip flexion. So not spine flexion, but hip flexion with a properly managed spine. As I've mentioned before, you've got the hip external rotation and internal rotation. And then finally, hip extension. So by being able to get adequate range of movement, and in some respects balanced range of movement through internal and external rotation, flexion and extension, we're going to be in a much better place to understanding whether we're overcoming our lower back pain or not. What these stretches are able to do as well is balance mobility and stability. So what we can do is, as we create more mobility through the hip, we can then start adding the stability back in its place. And what we are doing with regards to the spine is, because we aren't twisting and bending and flexing and doing all these things with the spine, we can brace that into position and then create the mobility around that stability, because we're creating stability through the spine by keeping it in position, and then what we can do is create then the necessary mobility for us to move around, be that into a deep squat if it's necessary, or if it's just being able to get down onto the floor, pick something up and carry it wherever we need to carry it. So from the very sort of athletic postures to the very everyday postures, having good mobility of the hips, having good stability of the spine, and then balancing those two together is a much more effective way of overcoming lower back pain. And finally, the hips are the power generators for lifting, carrying, picking things up, bending forward, jumping, sprinting, walking, running. All these different movements, they all come from the hips. So if we've got tightness through the hips, the muscles aren't working as effectively. If we can remove that tightness or reduce that tightness, create some stability through there, get good muscle activation through there, our hips are going to be much more healthy to be able to take care of the lower back that's just above it. So what we want to be able to do is, in some respects, create healthy hips, mobile hips, but stable hips, so they're able to function adequately for everything that we need them for, and then put on top of that a stable spine with the bracing of a torso and then the hinging of the hip. When we can put all of that together, we're going to be in a much better place to protect our back, but also allow it to heal and overcome the lower back pain that we're experiencing. How do we then go about selecting the correct stretches? Because yes, you can do all four of them, and you can, in some respects, cover all the bases. But there are some instances when certain stretches aren't going to be effective and certain stretches are going to be effective. So the first thing that we have to do is, first of all, go through some sort of consultation and assessment process to be able to determine which is going to be the most effective stretches to do and the least effective stretches to do. So what we then do is, essentially, we're selecting the correct stretches for the individual. Now, depending on the consultation and assessment, will depend on the ones selected. So where I've shown you four, for one person, it may be two of them. For a second person, it may be all four of them. For a third person, it may be just one of them. So it's coming to some sort of understanding as to which one is going to be most effective. So that's point number one. Point number two is, if you have sciatic type symptoms, so pain that goes either into the hips or down to the back of the legs, you want to remove the glute stretch. Because if you come into this position, what you can be doing is stretching the branches of the sciatic nerve, which can then irritate it. And if you're irritating that nerve, it's going to keep you painful. So where they are doing a great job, or could be doing a great job, to create healthy hips, it's very much understanding, if you have sciatic symptoms, you want to remove any stretching of the glutes. A much more effective way is like a massage into the hips or a foam roll into the hips to be able to loosen it off that way. And what you're not then doing is stretching the sciatic nerve, which is going to irritate the sciatic nerve. So if you have sciatic symptoms, remove the glute stretch. Number three is, what movement don't you have at the hip? Is it external rotation? Is it internal rotation? Is it good extension whilst maintaining posture of the spine? Is it good flexion whilst maintaining posture of the spine? So you've got to identify what position is missing. Is it external, internal, extension, or flexion? Again, only that can really come up during consultation and assessment. So we need to go through that process first before we can go determining what is going to be best for the individual. And finally, number four, what if your hips have adequate range of movement? So you've got good external, internal, extension and flexion. What could be going on then? Why could the back be a problem if you've got good moving hips? Well, number one, the hips need adequate range of movement. So we don't want too much flexibility, because as I've mentioned in the previous video, loose joints or stretching muscles can create loose joints. Loose joints are more unstable, and that can add pressure and tension into certain areas of the body. So what we need is adequate ranges of movement put together with stability. So we need to create stability through the hip if you've got good range of movement. And then we need to understand if it's just a bit of muscle tension, in so much as that can be sorted out with, say, a foam roller or some sort of massage ball of some kind. So again, we have to understand, if you have adequate range of movement, what is going to be the most effective route for you. Is it just massaging, foam rolling? Is it creating the stability through the hips to be able to manage the extra range of movement that you have? To quickly summarize everything that we talked about in this video, there are essentially 4 stretches for the hips. We've got the adductors for the inside of the leg. So we're down, we're here. We've got psoas, which is this position. We've got rectus femoris, which is this position. And then we've got glutes, which is this position. So those are the 4 sort of most basic stretches for the hip. What we've then got to understand is which ones do we choose. And I've talked about some of those reasons in the previous part. Sciatica, remove the glute stretch. If you've got adequately moving hips, what do we need to put in place? Is it extra stability? Is it just a bit of foam rolling to deactivate some of the muscles because they're a little bit hyperactive? So if you need help with determining any of that, please do just click the link below. You'll get booked into the rehab program, which is, first of all, you'll enter your name and details and you'll fill out 2 questionnaires. They'll come to me, I'll read them, I'll then be in touch to book your consultation. We'll do that, we'll then set you up with the advice, recommendations and action steps, and then we'll take you through the 2 weeks of support to get it implemented and get you moving forward with overcoming your lower back pain. So many thanks for watching. My name is Chris from Chris for Whole Training. I'll speak to you in the next tutorial.